The morning of April 18, 1943, began like countless others in the Pacific War. Humid air, distant engine noise, and the quiet tension of men who knew history was moving faster than any map could record. But on that morning, the United States military was not preparing to defend, not reacting and not improvising. It was hunting. And the target was not a ship, not a base, not an island. The target was a man, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the most respected naval mind in Imperial Japan, and the symbol of everything America wanted to break. Yamamoto was not just another enemy commander. He was the brain behind Japan's opening strike. The strategist who understood American industrial power better than most Americans did, and the man who once warned his own government that Japan could only run wild for 6 months before the war turned against them. Ironically, he was right. By 1943, the tide in the Pacific was shifting. Midway had shattered Japan's carrier strength, Guadalcanal had bled its army, and American production was accelerating toward overwhelming force. Yamamoto knew this, and that knowledge made him dangerous. What Yamamoto didn't know was that American codebreakers were listening. Hidden inside windowless rooms far from the front lines, U.S. Navy cryptographers had cracked portions of Japan's naval communication system. These men never fired weapons, never wore medals into battle, and never saw the faces of the enemies they destroyed. But on one intercepted message, they found gold. Yamamoto was planning an inspection tour. His route, timing, aircraft type, and exact schedule were all laid out in precise detail. It was a mistake born of confidence, and it gave America something it rarely had in war: certainty. The intelligence landed on the desks of senior commanders like a loaded weapon. This was not a normal combat opportunity. This was targeted killing at the highest level. Killing Yamamoto could cripple Japanese morale and command cohesion, but it also carried enormous risk. If Japan suspected their codes were compromised, the intelligence advantage that saved thousands of American lives could vanish overnight. The decision climbed all the way to the top. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was informed. After careful consideration, the order came back short and unmistakable. Proceed. Yamamoto was to be eliminated. The mission was classified beyond top secret. Pilots would not be told the target's identity until the last possible moment, and there would be no backup, no second attempt, no public acknowledgement. The task fell to the U.S. Army Air Force's 339th Fighter Squadron, flying P-38 Lightning fighters, twin-engine aircraft with long range and heavy firepower. Only the P-38 could fly the extreme distance required, skim low over the ocean to avoid radar, climb fast enough to intercept, and fight its way back. Even then, the mission would stretch the aircraft to the edge of its capabilities. The flight plan was brutal. Over 1,000 miles round trip, mostly over open water. No navigation beacons, no radio chatter, no rescue if they went down. Fuel calculations were so tight that even minor errors could mean ditching in the ocean and disappearing without a trace. Every pilot knew this was not a normal sortie. This was a one-shot execution mission. On the morning of the mission, the pilots were briefed in absolute secrecy. When they finally learned the identity of their target, the room went silent. They were not being asked to fight an enemy formation. They were being asked to assassinate the highest-ranking officer they had ever been assigned to engage. There would be no medals announced immediately, no victory parades, no headlines. If the mission succeeded, the world might never know how it happened. As the P-38s lifted off, engines roaring against the tropical air, the pilots descended to wave-top level and disappeared from friendly radar. For hours, they flew in silence, guided only by compass headings and dead reckoning. One mistake, one cloud bank, one unexpected patrol could expose them. The ocean below was endless, indifferent, and waiting. Yamamoto, meanwhile, boarded his aircraft with confidence. He believed discipline and visibility mattered. His inspection tour was meant to inspire troops and demonstrate leadership presence. His aircraft flew on schedule, at a known altitude, trusting secrecy that no longer existed. Escort fighters surrounded him, but they were not expecting an ambush, especially not one calculated to the minute. As the American fighters climbed toward interception altitude, fuel gauges hovered near empty. The pilots scanned the horizon, tension tightening with every passing second. If the enemy aircraft were early or late by even minutes, the mission would fail. There would be no second chance. Then, against the blue Pacific sky, they saw them. Two Japanese bombers escorted by fighters exactly where intelligence predicted. The American formation split instantly. There was no hesitation. This was the moment the mission existed for. Engines screamed as throttles went forward. Tracers streaked through the air. The silence of hours shattered into seconds of violent motion. Yamamoto's aircraft never knew what hit it. Within moments, bullets tore through the bomber. Smoke poured from the engines. The aircraft rolled, clipped the treetops, and vanished into the jungle below. The man who planned Pearl Harbor was dead. Not in a grand naval battle, not aboard a flagship, but alone, surprised, and defeated by precision and intelligence. The American pilots did not cheer. They turned back immediately, racing fuel starvation and distance. Several barely made it home, some ditched at sea. The mission succeeded, but at a cost no one would publicly count. Japan announced Yamamoto's death weeks later, portraying it as heroic, vague, and accidental. The United States remained silent. The true story stayed classified. No celebration, no confirmation. Just a quiet understanding among a handful of men that history had changed direction in midair. This was not a victory of numbers. It was a victory of information. And it marked the moment when Japan began to realize the Americans were not just fighting harder. They were thinking faster. The disappearance of Admiral Yamamoto did not feel real at first. In the hours after the ambush, Japanese radio operators waited for signals that never came. Escort pilots reported chaos, smoke, and a crash into the jungle, but no confirmation. For an empire built on hierarchy and certainty, uncertainty was poison. Yamamoto was not just a commander. He was a pillar of belief. His survival had symbolized control. His sudden silence shattered that illusion. When Japanese recovery teams finally reached the crash site deep in the jungle of Bougainville, they found the wreckage scattered among trees torn apart by impact. Yamamoto's body was discovered still strapped into his seat, sword by his side, gloves on, posture rigid even in death. The image would never be shown publicly, but among senior officers the truth spread fast. This was not an accident. This was a precise strike. And that realization hit harder than the bullets that downed the aircraft. The Japanese high command faced an impossible question. How did the Americans know? Yamamoto's itinerary had been transmitted through what Japan believed to be secure naval codes. If those codes were compromised, the entire war effort was exposed. But admitting that possibility meant admitting a catastrophic failure. Instead, the leadership chose denial. The official narrative framed Yamamoto's death as a battlefield loss. Heroic, tragic, unavoidable. The real fear stayed buried. America was inside their communications. That fear began to quietly reshape Japanese operations. Schedules changed, routes shifted. Commanders became cautious, and caution in war often means hesitation. Yamamoto had been aggressive, decisive, and intellectually flexible. His replacement lacked that same authority and strategic instinct. The Japanese Navy did not collapse overnight, but it lost its sharpest edge. Momentum slowed. Initiative slipped. And across the Pacific, American commanders felt the change without fully understanding its cause. Back in the United States, the men who flew the mission returned to normal operations as if nothing extraordinary had happened. There were no public commendations, no victory announcements. Some pilots struggled with the weight of what they had done, not because the target was undeserving, but because killing a man by name, face, and schedule is different from fighting an anonymous enemy. This was personal warfare, and it left marks that medals could not erase. The intelligence officers who made the mission possible were ordered into deeper silence. Their success was too dangerous to celebrate. If Japan ever confirmed its codes were broken, thousands of future operations would be compromised. So the truth was locked away. Reports were classified. Details buried. Even many senior American commanders never learned how the ambush truly happened. Victory demanded secrecy, and secrecy demanded sacrifice. As months passed, the Pacific War accelerated toward its brutal conclusion. Island by island, Japan lost ground. Supply lines collapsed under relentless submarine attacks. Air superiority shifted permanently to American hands. Yamamoto's earlier warning that Japan could not win a long war proved prophetic. But the man who foresaw it was gone, removed by a mission that compressed intelligence, aviation, and political decision-making into a single, lethal moment. Operation Vengeance became a template without being named. Future wars would study it quietly. Targeted strikes, precision timing, intelligence-driven assassination, the concept that leadership itself could be a battlefield. But in 1943, this was new, morally complex, strategically brilliant, and deeply controversial. The United States had crossed a line, and history would never fully agree on whether that line should exist. When the war ended and the truth slowly emerged decades later, Operation Vengeance was no longer just a military success. It became a lesson, a demonstration that wars are not only won by force but by understanding the enemy better than they understand themselves. Yamamoto was defeated not by overwhelming firepower, but by information, discipline, and patience. For Japan, his death symbolized the beginning of inevitable defeat. For America, it marked the moment modern warfare truly arrived, where a single intercepted message could change the direction of a global conflict. And for the men involved, it remained something quieter, a mission completed, a burden carried, and a truth spoken only when history was finally ready to listen. The ocean never revealed the ambush. The jungle kept its silence, and the war moved forward and altered forever by a decision made in secrecy. Long after the wreckage on Bougainville was swallowed by jungle, the effects of Operation Vengeance continued to echo across the Pacific. The death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was not just the loss of a commander. It was the removal of Japan's strategic compass. Yamamoto had been the rare leader who understood both Japanese doctrine and American industrial power. He knew Japan could not win a prolonged war, and because of that, every decision he made was aimed at speed, shock, and psychological dominance. With him gone, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost its most dangerous mind.
The commanders who replaced Yamamoto were competent, loyal, and brave, but they were not innovators. Where Yamamoto adapted, they followed tradition. Where Yamamoto took calculated risks, they avoided responsibility. This shift subtly changed the war's rhythm. Japanese operations became more predictable, defensive rather than offensive, reactive rather than visionary. The Americans did not immediately know why the enemy felt different, only that something fundamental had shifted in their favor. On the American side, Operation Vengeance accelerated a transformation already underway. Intelligence was no longer a supporting element of warfare. It became central. Commanders who once trusted only aircraft counts and troop numbers began asking different questions. What does the enemy believe? What does the enemy expect? What information are they protecting? The war in the Pacific increasingly became a contest of perception as much as firepower. Yamamoto's death was the proof that understanding the enemy could be as lethal as bombing him. Yet the moral weight of the operation never fully disappeared. Even years later, debates continued quietly within military and political circles. Was Yamamoto a legitimate battlefield target? Yes. Was he actively directing war operations? Yes. But this was also a deliberate, intelligence-driven killing of a named individual. The line between combat and assassination had blurred. The United States never publicly celebrated the mission during the war for a reason. Leaders understood that some victories must remain unspoken. For the pilots involved, the legacy was deeply personal. Many returned home carrying stories they were forbidden to tell. Medals were delayed, citations vague. Some struggled with the realization that their most important mission would never be publicly acknowledged in their lifetime. Others felt pride mixed with unease. Not regret, but awareness. They had seen the future of warfare before the world was ready to talk about it.
Third offers no certainty there. What is certain is that his death removed one of the last voices capable of altering Japan's path before total destruction. Decades later, when the files were finally declassified, Operation Vengeance emerged as one of the most precise missions ever executed, not because of advanced technology, but because of discipline. Pilots flew exact headings without deviation. Navigators trusted calculations down to the minute. Intelligence officers resisted the urge to overuse their advantage. Every participant understood that failure would expose far more than a single mission. It would expose the entire Allied intelligence war. Today, military academies study Operation Vengeance not as a dramatic dogfight, but as a case study in restraint, coordination, and strategic patience. It is taught as a reminder that power does not come from force alone, but from knowing when and how to apply it. Yamamoto's aircraft was destroyed in minutes, but the preparation behind it took months, and the consequences reshaped warfare for generations. In the end, Operation Vengeance was not about revenge, despite its name. It was about control, of information, of timing, of decision-making under pressure. It marked the moment modern targeted warfare truly began. A moment when a war spanning oceans turned on a single flight plan, intercepted words, and men willing to act without recognition. The Pacific War would rage on, consuming lives and nations. But from that April morning onward, one truth was undeniable. No leader was untouchable. No distance was safe. And no war would ever again be fought without the shadow of intelligence hanging over every command decision. That was the legacy of Operation Vengeance, and it changed warfare forever.